The Lakers didn't get lucky. They got robbed a whole city blind and everybody clapped for it like it was a normal Tuesday. I don't care what ESPN says about mutual benefit trades. There's no such thing. Every trade in NBA history has a winner and a loser, and one side always gets exposed. It just takes some people longer to admit it than others, and some franchises are still in denial decades later. You think the Nets trading Kevin Durant was bad? That's not even top 5 on this list. You think giving up Doncic was the worst decision in franchise history? Wait until you see what's actually number 1, because it's not the one you think it is, and the receipts are going to shock you, even if you follow this stuff every single day. 15 trades, ranked, every single one broken down, the exact stats, the excuses the front office gave at the press conference, what actually happened after the cameras left, and why the gap keeps getting wider every year that passes. And by the time we get to number 1, you're going to understand why front offices still can't sleep at night thinking about it. This is your warning. Don't say I didn't tell you. Here's why this matters right now. Half these trades still get talked about like they were fine, like it was a wash, like both front offices walked away happy and shook hands. They weren't fine. They were disasters that got rebranded as business decisions after the fact, because admitting you got fleeced on national television is bad for business and worse for job security. By the end of this video, you're going to know exactly which GMs should have been fired the day the ink dried, and which franchises are still paying for one phone call 20, 30, even 50 years later. You're going to walk away from this video looking at every single even trade differently, and you're never going to let a friend call one of these deals fine again without pulling up the receipts. We're going in order, 15 to 1. Every single one gets the full breakdown. The stats, the historical comparisons, the why, the counter-argument people actually make in the comments, and what it costs the losing side long-term. And nobody's talking about how bad number 1 actually is. Not the way we're about to break it down for the next hour. Quick note before we start. This isn't a list of bad contracts or bad draft picks. Those are different videos and honestly, easier videos to make. This is specifically about trades. 2 front offices, 1 negotiating table, 1 decision that in hindsight makes you wonder what anybody in that room was actually looking at. Some of these are recent. Some of these happened before some of you were even born. All 15 still matter because the patterns repeat, and if you're paying attention, you'll start seeing the exact same mistakes happening again in real time this season. Let's get into it. Number 15, the quiet robbery. Chris Paul to the Rockets, back in 2017. Everybody remembers the Harden-Westbrook fallout in OKC. Nobody remembers that a few years later, the Clippers basically gift-wrapped a top 5 point guard in his prime and got role players back for him. This is where the modern era of star-fatigue trades really started, and it's still happening today, right now, with teams that swear they've learned better. It's the perfect trade to open this list with, because it's the blueprint for almost everything that follows. The Clippers sent out Chris Paul, a top-tier two-way engine, averaging 18 points and over 10 assists a night, at an efficiency almost nobody in the league could match at the point guard position. In return, they got Patrick Beverley, Lou Williams, DeAndre Liggins, and a package of picks that never turned into a star. Lou Williams became great for Houston's bench, not the Clippers' rotation. Beverley was a solid, gritty role piece, not a franchise cornerstone by any real measure. The very next season, the Rockets won 65 games, the best record in franchise history at that point, and Paul was a top 3 MVP finisher that same year. None of the pieces the Clippers received ever came close to matching that level of individual production in a Clippers uniform. This is basically the same move Milwaukee made with Kareem back in '75, except it happened decades later, and everybody had the tape on how badly that one turned out. You'd think a front office would have learned by then. They didn't. History doesn't just rhyme in this league. Sometimes it copies and pastes. The counter-argument you'll hear in the comments, people will tell you Paul was injury-prone, and the Clippers were smart to cash out before his body broke down completely. Except Paul went on to play at an all-star level for years afterward across multiple franchises. The injury narrative was an excuse dressed up as analysis. Let's put a number on it. Paul's assist-to-turnover ratio that first year in Houston was one of the best of his entire career, At an age, most point guards are already losing a step. That's not decline. That's a front office confusing tired of the drama with declining production. And those two things are not the same thing at all. LA didn't want the drama. They didn't want the max extension risk on an aging point guard who'd had recurring hamstring issues show up specifically in the playoffs. The exact moments that mattered most for a franchise trying to finally get past the second round. So they let the whole league know it, quietly, through back channels. And that's exactly how you get lowballed in this business. Once the league knows you want out, your leverage evaporates before you even pick up the phone to start negotiating. Houston made one call, sensed the desperation in the room, and got a top 10 player for well below market value. And here's the part that makes it worse. LA wasn't even rebuilding. They were trying to stay competitive. So they took a discount return on a star. In a year, they were still fielding a playoff caliber roster for reasons that had almost nothing to do with actual basketball fit. That trade directly built the Rockets team that pushed a 73-win Warriors dynasty to 7 games in the Western Conference Finals the following spring. A series some people still argue Houston should have won if a couple of shots had fallen differently in the fourth quarter. One trade, one roster shift. The entire complexion of the Western Conference changed because one team panicked out of exhaustion and one team stayed patient and struck the second the price dropped. And the Clippers? They spent the next several seasons trying to piece together a new contending core through free agency and subsequent trades, chasing exactly the kind of star power they just let walk out the door for spare parts. Think about the timeline here for a second. The Clippers moved on from Paul specifically because they were worried about his body holding up in a playoff run. Houston immediately used him in exactly that role. Deep playoff minutes, high leverage possessions, and he delivered. The exact scenario LA said they were avoiding is the exact scenario Houston bet on and won. The Clippers didn't trade Chris Paul. They gave him away and called it a rebuild. And that's the tame one on this list. Number 14 is where a team stopped being cautious and started being flat-out reckless with a franchise cornerstone, purely out of frustration. Number 14, the franchise killer, Vince Carter to the Nets back in 2004. Half-man, half-amazing left Toronto in the middle of the 2004 season, and the Raptors got pennies on the dollar because they wanted him gone more than they wanted actual value in return. This is the trade every fan base points to whenever somebody says, never trade out of spite, and for very good reason. It's also one of the earliest examples on this list of a front office letting the media narrative dictate the timeline of a deal instead of controlling it themselves. Toronto got Alonzo Mourning back, who literally never played a single game for them and was flipped again almost immediately. Plus Eric Williams, Aaron Williams, and 2 first-round picks that turned into rotational role players. Not stars, not even close to stars. Carter went to New Jersey and immediately made 2 All-Star teams, averaging over 24 points a night in his first full season there, looking like a completely re-energized player the second he got out from under the frustration in Toronto. He also helped lead the Nets to consecutive playoff appearances, giving the franchise exactly the kind of star power Toronto had just decided wasn't worth the trouble anymore. Compare that return to what Dallas got decades later for Doncic. Role players and an aging star, and you realize this exact mistake, giving up a franchise player out of frustration instead of patience, gets repeated generation after generation, team after team, like nobody in these front offices is watching film on the last time it happened to somebody else. People say Carter had quit on Toronto and wasn't giving full effort, so any return was better than nothing. Except effort concerns don't erase a player's talent level, and Toronto could have waited for a better package instead of taking the first offer that got him out the door that same week. Let's put a number on it. Within 2 seasons of the trade, Carter's scoring average in New Jersey was higher than anything he'd posted in his final 2 seasons in Toronto. Whatever the effort narrative was selling, the box score tells a completely different story once he actually wanted to be somewhere. This wasn't a basketball trade. This was a breakup, plain and simple, playing out in public. Toronto let years of frustration over Carter's public trade requests and a perceived lack of hustle override actual roster-building logic. They took the very first deal that got him out of the building instead of waiting even a few extra weeks for the best possible offer. because at that point, the front office just wanted the story to be over and the headlines to stop. That's the tell every single time you see a lopsided trade like this one. When a front office starts negotiating against a media cycle instead of against the market, they almost always lose the deal. The Raptors didn't make the playoffs again for 4 straight seasons after moving Carter. 4 full seasons of losing basketball, directly traceable to one emotional decision made in a rush during a bad news cycle. Meanwhile, the Nets got an all-star caliber score for what amounts to spare parts and cash, and got several extra playoff runs out of him in the years that immediately followed. Toronto had to essentially start their franchise rebuild from scratch, with almost nothing to show for the years Carter had already given them. And it took nearly a full decade for the organization to build back to sustained relevance. Toronto fans had to watch Carter dunk on their own team in their own building multiple times over the years that followed. That's not just a bad trade. That's a bad trade that gets rubbed in your face on the schedule every single season, in prime time, whether you want the reminder or not. Toronto didn't lose a trade. They lost a decade because they were mad at one guy for wanting out. Speaking of teams letting emotion drive the whole decision, 13 is even more petty. And it happened on national television in front of millions of people who still bring it up today. Number 13. The draft night gut punch. Trae Young and Luka Doncic swap back in 2018. Everybody knows this one by now. It's probably the most talked about draft night trade of the last decade, maybe ever. Nobody talks about how obvious the gap already was by year 2, before the different timelines excuses even had time to hold up under any real scrutiny. This one still gets brought up on live broadcasts every single time these two teams play each other, years later. Atlanta traded the draft rights to Luka Doncic, 3rd overall, for Trae Young, and a future first-round pick that eventually became Cam Reddish. Doncic made All-NBA first team by year 2 of his career. He got to a conference finals by year 3 and a full finals appearance by year 5. Young has made legitimate all-star teams and is a genuinely productive, exciting, high-usage player in his own right. But the gap in team-level winning by year 3 was already historic. Not close, not even debatable at that point. Doncic also finished in the top handful of MVP voting multiple times in this stretch. A level of individual recognition Young hasn't yet reached in his own career. Doncic's rookie averages alone 21 points, 6 boards, and 6 assists as a literal teenager adjusting to a new country and a completely different league structure. Beat what most established veterans were putting up that same season. Doncic wasn't a mystery prospect nobody had eyes on. He was already a EuroLeague MVP and a EuroLeague champion before he ever set foot on an NBA court. That's not projection. That's a finished product walking through the front door with a trophy case already full. People say Atlanta needed a pure point guard to run their offense, and Young fits that need better long term. Except need isn't the same as best player available, and no team should ever pass on a top 3 talent because of a positional preference that could have been solved a dozen other ways in free agency or a later draft. Let's put a number on it. By his mid-20s, Doncic had already logged more All-NBA first-team selections than most Hall of Fame point guards manage across an entire career. This isn't a give it time situation anymore. The verdict came in years ago. Front offices convinced themselves a true pass-first point guard fit their timeline better than a generational, ball-dominant scorer who'd need the offense run directly through him from day 1 of his career. Bro, the numbers literally don't lie. Doncic was putting up 25 points, 8 boards, and 8 assists a night in Europe's top professional league before he even got drafted. That wasn't a projection on a spreadsheet somewhere. That was already happening on tape against grown men in a real professional league with real stakes. Multiple teams picking ahead of Atlanta reportedly had real interest in taking Doncic themselves before the draft night trade even got worked out, which tells you the front office wasn't operating with secret information nobody else had. They just made a different bet than everyone around them and lost. One franchise built a finals contender essentially by accident, riding a generational talent nobody else in that draft room was willing to bet the timeline on. The other is still explaining the decision in press conferences 6 years later, every single time Doncic's name gets brought up on an Atlanta broadcast. And based on how things are trending, that doesn't look like it's going to stop anytime soon. Every single trade Atlanta has made since has in some way been about trying to build a contending timeline around Young that matches what Dallas got for free. And that's an almost impossible bar to clear when the other team already has the generational piece locked in. Atlanta has since cycled through multiple coaches and front office voices, trying to build a real contender around Young, while Dallas built theirs almost by default the moment Doncic stepped off the plane. That's the real cost of a draft night miss at this level. It's not one bad year, it's an entire era of roster decisions trying to make up ground that never actually closes. Atlanta didn't just lose a draft night trade, they handed Dallas a franchise cornerstone gift wrapped, and they're still unwrapping the consequences. But if you think that's the worst draft night decision on this list, hold on. 12 goes back nearly 40 years further, and in some ways, it's actually worse. Number 12, the fax machine heist, Kobe Bryant for Blade Divac, back in 1996. An entire franchise's identity for the next 20 years came down to a fax machine, a stubborn front office looking for immediate help, and a solid center already past his physical peak years in Charlotte. This is the trade every single draft for talent, not need argument in modern basketball media eventually traces back to. Charlotte drafted Kobe Bryant 13th overall in the 1996 draft and immediately flipped him to the Lakers for Blade Divac, a legitimate starting center at the time who'd made an all-star team. Kobe went on to win 5 championships, made 18 all-star teams across his career, and finished as a top 5 all-time scorer in league history. Divac gave Charlotte 2 respectable, unremarkable seasons before leaving in free agency for Sacramento just a couple years later. He later became a respected, productive starter for the Kings for several more seasons, but nothing close to matching the trajectory of the guy Charlotte gave up to get him. Run the numbers on career win shares between those two players, and it's genuinely not close. It's one of the widest value gaps of any trade in the history of the entire league. Charlotte had actual intel that Kobe was special. There are well-documented stories about his individual pre-draft workout that reportedly blew scouts away in the room. They still passed on him for a proven veteran instead of trusting what they just watched with their own eyes. People say Charlotte needed immediate help and couldn't afford to gamble on an unproven 18-year-old fresh out of high school. Except that's exactly the kind of short-term thinking this entire video is about. The gap between what a team needs this season and what actually builds a dynasty. Let's put a number on it. Kobe's career points total ranks inside the all-time top 5, and Divac's career total, respectable as it was over a long career, doesn't come within shouting distance of it. That's not a close trade on any statistical measure you want to use. Nobody officially projected an 18-year-old high schooler to be a generational talent in real time. That's the standard excuse teams give looking back. But the Lakers front office clearly saw something almost everybody else in the league didn't, and they were willing to take the swing on upside over certainty. Charlotte wanted a proven, ready-made starter over an unproven kid straight out of high school. And that exact risk aversion is what turned this into the single most consequential trade of the modern NBA era. It's worth remembering this deal was actually agreed upon before the draft even happened. Charlotte drafted Kobe specifically to flip him, meaning the front office had already decided a proven veteran was the priority before they'd seen a single professional possession from the guy they were giving up. The Lakers got 2 separate three-peats directly connected to that one pick. 5 championships total across Kobe's storied career. Charlotte got 2 solid, unremarkable seasons out of Divac, and then watched their center walk in free agency for absolutely nothing in return. No compensation at all. The Hornets franchise itself would go on to relocate entirely within a decade, and while that's not solely because of one draft night trade, it's hard not to wonder how differently that organization's history plays out if they'd kept the guy who became the face of the league for the next 2 decades. Every single draft class since has at least one team pointing to this exact trade as the reason they refuse to pass on upside for a safe veteran fit. That's the legacy of this deal. It didn't just cost Charlotte a Hall of Famer, it rewrote how front offices across the entire league think about drafting talent versus drafting need. Charlotte traded away the greatest shooting guard of a generation for 2 years of a good not great center. Let that sink in. If you thought that was bad, wait until you see what Boston pulled off in broad daylight in 1980. A trade so smart it should genuinely be studied in business school to this day. Number 11. The blueprint everyone forgot. McHale and Parrish to Boston back in 1980. This is the trade every modern draft and stash and trade down for extra value strategy is trying to replicate. And honestly, still can't fully pull off because nobody's ever nailed it this cleanly again in league history, before or since. It's also proof that the best trades in NBA history aren't always the flashiest ones on the day they happen. Golden State traded the rights to the number 1 overall pick in the 1980 draft, which Boston used to select Kevin McHale, plus veteran center Robert Parrish, in exchange for the number 3 pick, which Golden State used on Joe Barry Carroll. Boston turned that single trade into 2 Hall of Famers, who anchored 3 championship teams throughout the entire 1980s. Golden State, meanwhile, didn't sniff a real title for over 3 decades after that trade closed the books. McHale would go on to make multiple all-star and all-defense teams as one of the most skilled low-post scorers of his generation, while Parrish quietly logged one of the longest, most durable careers in league history at the center position. 1 trade, 2 Hall of Famers, 3 championships in 1 decade. That's an efficiency rate no front office has matched since, and it happened with a single phone call, not years of careful, patient asset accumulation like teams do today. People say Golden State needed a proven college star to sell tickets immediately and couldn't afford to bet on a package deal with unclear individual outcomes. Except that's exactly the short-term thinking that cost them 30 years of relevance in the standings. Let's put a number on it. Carroll's career averages ended up being solid, unspectacular, forgettable numbers for a number 3 pick. McHale and Parrish combined for well over a dozen all-star selections. That's not a trade gap. That's a canyon. Golden State needed a star immediately to sell tickets and grab the more known, polished college talent in Carroll instead of betting on long-term projections from a package deal. Boston, meanwhile, played the long game, valuing 2 proven or high-upside pieces over a single unproven headline name. And it paid off in banners for a full decade straight, which is exactly the kind of patience most front offices claim to have and almost never actually show when the pressure's on. Boston's front office at the time was famous for exactly this kind of long-term asset thinking, and this trade is the single clearest example of why that reputation was earned instead of just marketing. 3 titles across the 1980s are directly traceable to this single trade. Golden State spent the better part of the next 30 years as a lottery-bound, largely irrelevant franchise before their next real contending window finally opened up decades later, under completely different ownership and leadership. Multiple coaching staffs and front office regimes came and went in Golden State during that stretch, each one inheriting the fallout of a decision made before most of them had even taken the job, which is exactly how far the consequences of one bad trade can actually stretch across an organization's history. Front offices today still study this exact trade structure when they're deciding whether to package a pick swap for immediate proven talent. It's basically the founding text of modern asset management in this league, and it happened over 40 years ago with far less analytics than teams have available today. Boston didn't win a trade in 1980. They bought a dynasty on layaway, and Golden State paid the interest for 30 years. Now let's talk about a team that traded away a legend because they figured his prime years were already behind him. They were dead wrong, and it cost them an entire era. Number 10. The Skyhook Special, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar to the Lakers, back in 1975. Milwaukee had the most dominant offensive weapon in basketball at the time and traded him away because he wanted out of a small market, and the front office couldn't build a real contender around him fast enough for his liking. This is easily the oldest trade on this list, and it's still one of the most one-sided. The Bucks received Elmore Smith, Brian Winters, Junior Bridgman, and Dave Myers in return for a top 2 player in the entire sport. Kareem went on to win 5 more championships, multiple additional MVPs across his career, and set the all-time scoring record that stood for almost 40 years until it was finally broken decades later. None of the four players Milwaukee received ever came close to matching the caliber of impact Kareem had at his absolute peak. He also remained durable and productive well into his late 30s, giving the Lakers over a decade of elite production from a single trade that Milwaukee thought they needed to make out of frustration. Four solid role players for a guy who'd go on to redefine what a center could be offensively for the next 2 decades of the sport. That's not a trade you make if you actually still believe in your franchise center. That's a trade you make when the front office has already given up on the relationship. People say the return was fair for the era, because trades back then simply didn't reflect superstar value the way they do now. Except that excuse doesn't hold up. Teams in that same era still understood the difference between a top 2 player and 4 rotation guys, and it showed almost immediately on the court. Let's put a number on it. Kareem's career scoring total stood as the all-time record for nearly 40 years. None of the 4 players Milwaukee got back in return ever made an All-NBA first team in their entire careers combined. Small market frustration drove this one more than anything happening on the actual court. Kareem publicly wanted a bigger stage and a better cultural fit for his personal life. Milwaukee couldn't convince him to stay or build fast enough around him to change his mind. And instead of fighting to keep a top 2 player in the entire league, they cashed him in for a package of solid, unspectacular role players just to avoid an ugly holdout. It's the same story that's played out with disgruntled superstars in every era of this league since. Teams underestimate how much leverage they actually have to negotiate a stay, or at least a better return, and they fold the moment a star says the word trade. The Lakers built the entire Showtime era of the 1980s around a center they only got because another team decided it was easier to let him walk than to fight for him. Think about that for a second. An entire era of basketball history exists because one franchise gave up first instead of digging in. Milwaukee, meanwhile, remained a solid competitive franchise in the years after, but never again reached the singular, transcendent level of dominance they had with a top 2 all-time player anchoring the middle of the floor every single night. Milwaukee wouldn't get back to true championship-level relevance for decades after, and every time the franchise finally broke through years later, older fans still brought up this exact trade as the what could have been that hung over the organization the entire time. Milwaukee traded the most unstoppable shot in basketball history because they got tired of asking him to stay. If you think losing a legend hurts, watch what happens when a team loses a legend and still has to pay the cap space consequences for over a decade after the fact. Number 9. The trade that broke Brooklyn. Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce to the Nets back in 2013. This is the trade that taught the entire league what not to do with draft capital. And front offices still reference it in negotiations to this day as the ultimate cautionary tale of mortgaging the future for a short-term splash. It's also the direct reason unprotected first-round picks got a lot rarer in negotiations across the league afterward. Brooklyn sent Boston a truckload of future first-round picks, multiple unprotected firsts, for 2 aging stars already on the back 9 of their careers. Those picks turned directly into the foundation of Boston's next contending era, including draft assets that eventually helped build the core around Jason Tatum's championship roster years later. Brooklyn, meanwhile, got 2 mediocre first-round playoff exits out of the entire deal before the whole thing was dismantled, and they started over from almost nothing. Both Garnett and Pierce were still productive, respected veterans during their time in Brooklyn, but productive veteran was never going to be worth the price the front office actually paid to acquire them. Some of those picks landed in lottery territory, specifically because Brooklyn's own roster got worse without the front office fully realizing it, since they traded away their future for players already in decline. That's a double punishment most casual fans don't even realize happened at the time. People say Brooklyn was trying to compete now in a major market, and picks are worthless if you're not winning games in the present. Except the picks they gave up directly built a championship roster for their rival, which is about as bad an outcome as worthless assets can possibly produce. Let's put a number on it. Brooklyn won exactly 1 playoff series with that core before the whole thing was broken up. One series for what amounted to nearly a decade of first-round draft capital. That's one of the worst exchange rates on this entire list. Brooklyn wanted a splash. They wanted relevance in a city that already had the Knicks, and a fan base demanding immediate results after years of irrelevance and empty arenas. Ownership pushed hard for star power over responsible asset management, and they mortgaged nearly a decade of future flexibility for 2 years of watchable, competitive, but not truly contending basketball. This is the exact opposite instinct of what made the McHale Parrish trade work decades earlier. Betting on proven, aging star power at the top of the market instead of quietly stockpiling picks while other teams overpay. Boston relaunched an entire dynasty on the back of those picks, a run that eventually produced a championship banner years later. Brooklyn spent the following decade rebuilding from almost nothing, all because of one over-aggressive, splashy summer that looked great on paper for about 5 minutes before reality set in. The Nets essentially handed their divisional rival the exact blueprint for a championship roster, then had to watch that roster get built and eventually win it all using assets that used to belong to them. This is the trade that basically ended the era of teams trading multiple, unprotected firsts for aging veterans without heavy protections attached. Every front office in the league adjusted their draft pick trading philosophy because of how badly this one specific deal blew up on the team, giving up the picks. Brooklyn traded for 2 legends and accidentally built Boston's next championship core in the process. Speaking of Boston cashing in on other teams' desperation, let's rewind 6 years earlier when they pulled off the exact same move with a former MVP still technically in his physical prime. Number 8. The trade that built a banner in one summer. Kevin Garnett to Boston back in 2007. This one worked immediately, in real time, and it's still the gold standard for how a superstar trade is supposed to go. For one side and one side only, while the other side pays for it for over a decade straight. It's basically the anti-Brooklyn trade, the version of this exact idea that actually worked out for everyone giving up the picks. Minnesota sent a former MVP to Boston for a package headlined by Al Jefferson, along with role players and picks. Boston won a championship the very next season, Garnett's very first year wearing green in the league. Minnesota didn't make the playoffs again for over a decade straight after that trade, the longest active playoff drought in the entire league at the time. It finally ended years later. Garnett also won Defensive Player of the Year honors during his time in Boston, becoming the anchor of one of the best defensive units the league had seen in years. On top of everything he was already providing offensively, 14 years. That's how long the drought stretched out. An entire generation of Timberwolves fans grew up without a single playoff appearance to point to, directly traceable back to one single summer trade made in a hurry. People say Minnesota had to move Garnett because he was aging and they'd never win a title with him as the lone star. Except Boston proved that same star could win a title in year one with the right pieces around him. The problem wasn't Garnett, it was everything Minnesota built around him for years. Let's put a number on it. Garnett's defensive rating in his first season with Boston was among the best in the entire league. That's not an aging player in decline. That's a star who'd simply never had real help before, finally getting it. Minnesota was tired of losing in the first round year after year, with Garnett essentially running a one-man show every single season with minimal help. They wanted a fresh start built around a younger, cheaper core. One trade later, they were the league's longest-running playoff drought, while the team that acquired their franchise player won a championship in a single summer with him in the fold. It's a brutal lesson in how much team context actually matters. The exact same player, the exact same skill set, produced completely different outcomes depending entirely on who was standing next to him on the floor. Boston got an immediate title and a Big Three era that produced multiple additional finals appearances over the following years. Minnesota got over a decade of irrelevance, multiple lottery balls that didn't hit the way the front office desperately needed them to, and a fan base forced to watch their franchise player win it all somewhere else almost immediately after he left. It's genuinely one of the fastest turnarounds from disappointing trade return to championship parade in league history, and it happened in less than 12 months. Boston fans got to watch a championship parade less than 12 months after acquiring Garnett, while Minnesota fans spent the next decade plus watching lottery balls bounce the wrong way every single May. That's not a rebuild timeline. That's a franchise-defining miscalculation that outlasted multiple front office regimes. Minnesota traded a top 5 talent for a rebuild that took 14 years to actually finish. Now picture that same disaster, except the team giving up the superstar didn't even get a real rebuild out of it. Just years of genuinely empty, wasted seasons with nothing to show. That's next. Number 7. The one everyone pretends was close. Domantas Sabonis for Tyrese Halliburton back in 2022. This trade happened in real time, in front of everybody, on national television, and people still argue it was fine for both sides. It wasn't fine. The gap has only gotten wider every single season since it actually happened. This is the most recent trade on the list before we get to the top 5, and it's proof this pattern hasn't slowed down at all in the modern game. Indiana sent out Sabonis, a solid two-way big man averaging near all-star production, and got back Halliburton, who immediately became an all-NBA point guard and led the Pacers to a conference finals run within just 2 seasons of the trade closing. Sacramento got a good starting center and finally ended a historic 16-year playoff drought, which is a genuinely real accomplishment worth acknowledging on its own. But Halliburton's assist numbers, all-NBA selections, and postseason impact have outpaced Sabonis's since almost immediately after the deal went through. Halliburton also became one of the faces of the league's marketing during that stretch, a level of national visibility that further underscores exactly how big a swing this trade turned out to be. Halliburton set a modern-era record for assist-to-turnover ratio in a single season not long after the trade. That's not development. That's a front office correctly identifying a skill set that simply hadn't fully clicked yet inside a crowded Sacramento offense. People say Sabonis has since become an all-NBA caliber player himself, so the trade is closer than people admit. Except even accounting for that growth, Halliburton's team-level impact and playoff resume have separated further every single season, not gotten closer. Let's put a number on it. Indiana's win total climbed dramatically within just a couple seasons of making Halliburton the engine of the offense. Sacramento, meanwhile, has bounced in and out of play-in territory in the years since. Same trade, 2 completely different trajectories. Sacramento wanted a proven, all-star caliber piece for instant credibility after over a decade and a half of total irrelevance in the standings. Indiana bet on a guard with elite processing speed and shooting upside that hadn't fully translated yet inside Sacramento's crowded offensive system. The bet hit generationally, and it hit fast. Faster than almost anyone outside the Indiana front office actually expected it to. It's a reminder that fit and role sometimes matter as much as raw talent level. Halliburton wasn't a hidden superstar Sacramento failed to notice. He was a talented player who simply needed a different system to fully unlock what he could do. One team got a franchise cornerstone who led a genuine run to the doorstep of the finals. The other got a good, solid starter and a short, satisfying but limited playoff cameo before first-round exits became the norm again shortly after that initial breakthrough. Indiana's front office has since been able to build additional pieces around Halliburton, specifically because his skill set made every other roster decision easier. That's the hidden value of getting a trade like this, right? It doesn't just give you one great player, it makes every future move simpler too. Every mock trade regrade published since has moved further in Indiana's favor. Not stabilized, not evened out, further. That's usually the sign a trade wasn't actually close to begin with, no matter how even it looked the day it was announced on television. Sacramento wanted to end a drought and accidentally handed Indiana its next decade. If you think betting on upside is risky, watch what happens when a team bets absolutely everything on a superstar's back and still ends up losing the trade anyway. Number 6. The blockbuster nobody wanted to admit was lopsided. Anthony Davis to the Lakers back in 2019. Everybody remembers the championship that followed almost immediately. Nobody talks enough about what New Orleans actually got back for a top 5, two-way big man still sitting right in his physical prime with years of production left. The Lakers sent out a package headlined by a young core piece and multiple unprotected first-round picks. Within a single year, Davis and the Lakers won a championship together. The picks New Orleans received have mostly turned into solid role players and useful trade chips over the years. Not a second franchise-altering star, which is exactly what a package that heavy is supposed to guarantee if the front office builds it right and gets a little bit lucky. Davis also became an all-defense anchor for the Lakers almost immediately, giving them the two-way infrastructure they'd been missing for years, on top of everything he brought offensively. New Orleans has since had to make more trades just to try to fully cash in that draft capital, meaning the return from this deal is still technically unfinished years and years later, while LA already has the banner permanently hanging in the rafters. People say New Orleans got the best possible package available, given Davis had already publicly forced the issue and had zero intention of staying. Except best available and actually good aren't the same thing, and the gap between what they got and what a top 5 prime player is worth remains massive either way. Let's put a number on it. Davis has made multiple all-defense and all-NBA teams since arriving in LA. None of the players New Orleans received in the deal have matched that level of individual recognition in the years since. Davis forced the issue publicly, requesting a trade well over a year in advance and making it clear to the entire league that he wanted a big market and a real contender. New Orleans had almost no real leverage left by the time an actual deal got done and had to take whatever offer kept the front office relationship from getting even worse than it already was in the media. This is the modern version of exactly what happened with Kareem in the 1970s. A star forces the issue publicly, and once the demand goes public, the receiving team knows it and prices accordingly. LA got an immediate title and a superstar who anchored their entire roster for years afterward, becoming the backbone of multiple contending seasons and a second superstar trade years later. New Orleans got draft capital that so far hasn't produced a true franchise centerpiece to actually replace what they gave up in that room. It's the same story we keep seeing on this list. The team giving up the star gets a wide, generic pile of assets, while the team receiving him gets an immediate, specific, and proven advantage that shows up on the scoreboard right away. This trade also set the template LA would run back years later with Doncic. Identify a disgruntled or undervalued superstar, move aggressively while other teams hesitate, and let the results do the talking. Once is a great trade. Twice is a pattern the rest of the league still hasn't figured out how to counter. The Lakers didn't just win that trade. They won a championship with the guy they got from it before some of those draft picks even played a single game. And if you think that's a gut punch, wait until you see the sequel to this exact story 6 years later with the same exact franchise on the winning side again. Number 5, the one-sided blockbuster of the modern era. Rudy Gobert to Minnesota back in 2022. This is what happens when a front office falls in love with a stat sheet and forgets to stress test the actual on-court fit before writing the check in draft picks and unprotected firsts. Minnesota gave up 5 players plus 4 unprotected first-round picks and a pick swap for 1 all-defense center. That's the heaviest single-player draft capital price tag of the entire modern era, full stop, no close second. The immediate fit next to another traditional, non-shooting big became a season-long storyline almost from week 1, with spacing issues showing up on film in nearly every single close game down the stretch. Minnesota's offensive rating in clutch situations that first season ranked near the bottom of the league, a direct symptom of trying to fit 2 non-shooting bigs into crunch time possessions against defenses built specifically to exploit exactly that weakness. 4 unprotected firsts is the kind of capital that builds an entire second core from scratch. Minnesota didn't just spend big on one player, they spent an entire alternate future on a single move. And that future is now playing out somewhere else. People say Gobert's defensive impact is undeniable, and the fit issues get overstated by media narrative. Except you can't separate individual defensive stats from what it actually costs the roster in spacing and shot creation on the other end. And the results on the floor back that up for multiple seasons. Let's put a number on it. Utah's rebuild landed them multiple future lottery picks and pick swaps that projected out as some of the most valuable draft capital in the league for years to come. Minnesota, meanwhile, entered luxury tax territory, just trying to make the fit work. Front offices got seduced by defensive rating and rim protection numbers on paper, without properly stress testing how two non-shooting bigs would actually share the floor together in crunch time lineups against elite playoff competition. Loud, impressive stats on the surface, but quiet chemistry problems that didn't fully show up until the actual game started being played under playoff pressure. It's a lesson the analytics era of this league still hasn't fully learned. You can win the numbers on a trade and still lose the roster because a spreadsheet doesn't tell you what happens when two 7-footers are both standing in the paint at the same time in a close fourth quarter. Utah restocked their entire draft capital pipeline for the next half-decade in a single afternoon and immediately pivoted into a full, methodical, well-run rebuild that's already paying off. Minnesota spent years untangling roster fit and cap flexibility problems that were all created directly by this one single trade. Every time Minnesota has since tried to make a smaller move around the edges of the roster, the size of the Gobert contract and the picks already gone have limited exactly how much flexibility the front office actually has left to work with. The trade's cost didn't stop the day it closed. It kept compounding every single offseason after. Front offices around the league reportedly use this exact trade internally as a cautionary example when discussing their own subsequent center trades. Proof that even a genuinely great individual player can become a net negative asset if the price paid ignores roster construction completely. Utah didn't trade Rudy Gobert. They cashed him in for an entire decade of draft lottery tickets. Now let's go back even further to a trade that didn't just cost picks. It cost an entire era of potential dominance that never got a real chance to fully play out. Number 4, the Sixers special. Wilt Chamberlain to Philadelphia back in 1965. The most dominant statistical force the sport has ever produced got traded mid-career for role players and cash, and it remains one of the single most lopsided deals on record almost 60 years later, still discussed by historians of the game. San Francisco sent Wilt back to Philadelphia for 3 players and cash considerations. Wilt went on to win titles, set assist and rebounding records at a position nobody else has matched since, and remains the only player in league history to ever average 50 points across a full season, a record that will realistically never be broken given how the modern game is structured and how the rules around pace and physicality have changed. He also led the league in assists in a separate season entirely as a center, which is a level of statistical versatility that still hasn't been matched by anyone else who's ever played the position. Wilt once grabbed 55 rebounds in a single game. 55. Against Bill Russell, one of the greatest rebounders ever to play. That's the caliber of player San Francisco decided to move purely for cash flow reasons. People say the different era excuse applies here too, that financial realities in the 1960s NBA were completely different from today. Except even by 1960s standards, trading the best player alive for cash instead of maximizing basketball value was recognized as a bad process at the time, not just in hindsight. Let's put a number on it. Wilt's career rebounding total remains the all-time record by a margin that isn't close to being threatened. None of the 3 players Philadelphia sent back the other way ever made a single all-star team afterward. Financial strain and a roster that couldn't build a real contender around a singular dominant force fast enough forced San Francisco's hand at the ownership level. They needed cash flow more than they needed a historically dominant center. And that priority mismatch is exactly how you end up giving away the best player alive for pennies on the dollar in basketball terms. It's worth remembering the league itself was still figuring out its own economics at the time, and franchises regularly made short-term financial calls that we'd consider basketball malpractice by today's standards, with today's television revenue and today's roster-building norms. Philadelphia got a top 2 player of all time for role players and cash considerations. That's not really a trade in any conventional sense of the word. That's closer to a fire sale, and the resume Wilt built in Philadelphia afterward proves exactly how badly the entire situation was undervalued by the selling side at the time. San Francisco's franchise struggled to find another era of true relevance for years after letting arguably the most dominant individual force the sport has ever seen simply walk out the door for cash. 6 decades later, this trade still gets cited by basketball historians as the clearest example of a franchise valuing short-term financial survival over on-court dominance. And it's a cautionary tale that predates almost every other entry on this entire list. You don't trade the only 100-point scorer in league history for cash and spare parts. Somebody should have been fired the day that deal was announced. Now we're into the top 3, and this next one is a decision an entire fan base still brings up completely unprompted, decades after it actually happened. Number 3, the trade that aged like milk in real time. Kawhi Leonard for DeMar DeRozan back in 2018. San Antonio moved on from a disgruntled superstar amid a messy public medical dispute that got uglier by the week and dominated the national basketball conversation for months. Toronto cashed in immediately, and I mean immediately, not eventually, not after some patient multi-year rebuild. The Spurs got DeRozan back, a good established two-way scorer, but not a top-tier two-way force by any real stretch of the imagination. Toronto got a legitimate top-5 two-way superstar who led them to the franchise's first championship in year 1 of the trade. Year 1, not year 3, not a slow multi-season build. Year 1 on a final stage against a genuine super team loaded with multiple former champions. That championship run included one of the most iconic individual shots in playoff history, a moment that's been replayed more times than almost any other single possession in recent NBA memory. And it happened wearing a Toronto jersey instead of a San Antonio one. Leonard's playoff efficiency numbers that championship postseason were some of the best of any player in a finals run in over a decade. San Antonio traded that production away out of frustration over a medical staff dispute that never fully got resolved publicly. People say San Antonio had no choice given how fractured the relationship had become, and any return was better than watching him walk for nothing in free agency. Except a full season of leverage remained, and other teams around the league were reportedly willing to offer more if San Antonio had waited even a little longer. Let's put a number on it. Leonard's Finals MVP performance that postseason still ranks among the most efficient runs by any player in league history. San Antonio traded that away for a very good, but clearly lesser scoring option. Health concerns around Leonard's quad injury and a fractured relationship between the player and the front office made San Antonio move fast instead of moving smart. They needed a recognizable name back to sell to their own fan base immediately and grab the first big one available instead of maximizing the return through a longer, more patient process. Compare that to how the Anthony Davis situation was eventually handled a year later. A full patient process with multiple teams bidding. And you see exactly what San Antonio left on the table by moving as fast as they did. Toronto turned what was essentially a one-year rental into a championship banner that hangs in the rafters forever, permanently, regardless of anything that happened afterward. San Antonio has been stuck in a lengthy, still ongoing rebuild ever since that trade effectively closed the book on their multi-decade run of sustained championship-level contention. Think about the timeline of that franchise before this trade. One of the most consistently successful organizations in professional sports, year after year of playoff appearances. And then this single move essentially ended that streak for good, replaced by a rebuild that's still searching for its next real contender years later. Leonard left in free agency the very next summer, meaning Toronto got exactly 1 year of production and still walked away with the single greatest possible outcome a franchise can have. San Antonio didn't just lose the star, they lost him for what amounted to a single winning lottery ticket that someone else got to cash. Toronto rented a superstar for 1 single year and walked away with a championship. San Antonio is still looking for the receipts. 2 left. And if you thought these were lopsided, the next one isn't even close, and it cost a franchise an entire era of relevance in the league. Number 2, the robbery nobody called out in real time. James Harden to Houston back in 2012. Oklahoma City had a top 3 team in the entire league on paper and traded away the piece that turned out to be a future MVP-level scorer over a contract disagreement that, in hindsight, looks almost unbelievable to have let actually happen the way it did. OKC sent Harden to Houston for role players and future picks because ownership didn't want to pay the luxury tax that would come with paying 3 max-caliber stars at the exact same time on one roster. Harden went on to win an MVP, make multiple All-NBA first teams, and become one of the most prolific individual scorers of his entire generation, if not in league history. The very team that traded him watched him torch them in the playoffs for the better part of the following decade, year after year. He also led the league in scoring multiple separate seasons and finished with career scoring totals that rank among the highest ever recorded. A level of offensive production OKC watched from the outside for the rest of his prime. Harden's per 36-minute numbers off the bench in OKC were already elite before the trade even happened. This wasn't a case of a role player suddenly figuring it out somewhere else by luck. This was a star being used the wrong way by design and then handed over to a team that used him exactly right from day one. People say OKC had to move somebody given the looming tax bill, and Harden was the most tradable of the 3 stars at the time. Except tradable doesn't mean the right choice. They could have paid the tax for a year or 2 and let the extensions play out before making a call that big. Let's put a number on it. Harden led the league in scoring multiple times after the trade and won an MVP. Not one of the players OKC got back in return ever made an all-star team wearing that jersey. Ownership prioritized short-term luxury tax flexibility over locking in a top 10 scoring talent during his absolute prime years, right as he was about to break out. This is the front office equivalent of selling a stock the week before it explodes in value, and then watching from the sidelines for 10 straight years while somebody else cashes in. It also completely reshaped how future front offices thought about paying the tax for a young core. Teams that came after OKC in similar spots pointed directly to this trade as the example of what not to do when you're staring down 3 max-caliber extensions at once. Houston built a 65-win season and a genuine sustained title contender for most of the following decade around Harden. OKC never got back to a finals with that exact 3-star core, and the what-if still gets brought up every single time that era of basketball comes up in conversation among longtime fans of the league. Picture the alternate timeline for a second. A full prime year's core kept intact, no luxury tax panic, multiple realistic runs at a championship in a stretch of the league that was there for the taking. Instead, OKC got years of nearly their playoff exits with a rebuilt roster, while the guy they let go became the engine of the team that kept eliminating them. OKC eventually rebuilt into a contender again years later through the draft, which is the one saving grace here. But that rebuild took the better part of a decade, multiple high lottery picks, and a complete roster teardown to accomplish what keeping Harden might have handed them for free. OKC traded away an MVP caliber talent to save money. That's not a basketball decision. That's a business decision that basketball had to live with for 10 years. And now number 1. The trade's so lopsided it happened this decade in front of everyone, live, and the league still hasn't fully processed what it actually means going forward. Number 1. The trade that broke the league's brain. Luka Doncic to the Lakers back in 2025. This isn't ancient history. This happened in front of a live audience, and people still don't fully believe it happened the way it did. A top 5 player in the entire sport, 25 years old, already a finals participant, traded in the middle of the season with almost no warning to anybody outside that one front office. Dallas sent out a top 5 talent in his prime, a guy who'd already led a franchise all the way to the NBA Finals just a couple years earlier, and got back Anthony Davis, an accomplished but aging star with an extensive, well-documented injury history, plus a handful of role pieces. Within months, the Lakers had a top-tier offensive engine locked into their core for the next decade of the franchise's future. Dallas, meanwhile, is still explaining the decision to their own fan base in press conferences more than a year later, and the explanations still don't fully add up to most people watching from outside the building. Season ticket holders in Dallas reportedly demanded refunds within days of the trade. Arena chants turned hostile toward ownership almost immediately, and the backlash became one of the biggest sports stories of the year regardless of what else was happening around the league at the time. Doncic's usage rate and box plus minus at the time of the trade put him in the same statistical tier as the league's top 2 or 3 players. Period. Full stop. No real argument to be made otherwise. You don't trade a player in that tier mid-career unless something well outside basketball is driving the decision behind closed doors. People say Davis's two-way fit and durability upside under a new conditioning program made this closer than the outrage suggested at the time. Except the earliest returns already show the offensive gap Doncic's absence created. And one healthy, motivated season doesn't undo a decade of statistical trajectory in the other direction. Let's put a number on it. Doncic was already a multi-time All-NBA first-team selection and a finals participant before turning 26. Very few players in league history reach that combination that early, and almost none of them get traded mid-career while still climbing. Reported conditioning concerns, reported durability questions, reported front office frustration behind the scenes, and a stated belief that Davis's two-way fit solved more immediate problems for a win-now roster. The numbers say otherwise, and they said otherwise from day one. The numbers literally don't lie. You don't trade a top 5, 25-year-old offensive engine still on the way up for an older star carrying a longer injury history unless something well beyond basketball drove that call. And everybody watching knew it in real time, no matter what the press release said. Compare the actual timeline of information available to Dallas's front office to the timeline available to every other team on this list. And this trade stands alone. There was no injury forcing the move, no public trade request from the player, no expiring contract crisis. Just a decision made behind closed doors that the rest of the league is still trying to fully explain. Every single mock trade grade published the day it happened got run back within a single year. And the gap only widened with every passing month that followed the initial shock. This is the trade every future superstar deal is going to get measured against for the next 20 years. The exact same way people still measure trades against the Kobe deal from all the way back in 1996. Picture the next disgruntled superstar situation that comes up around the league. And it will, because it always does. And picture every single front office in that room bringing up this exact trade as the cautionary tale of what happens when you move a top 5, prime-age talent for an aging star with an injury history, no matter how good that older star's individual resume looks on paper. Every single trade we just covered on this list needed years, sometimes decades, for the gap to fully reveal itself. This one didn't need years. It didn't need a rebuild to prove itself right or wrong. The value gap was visible in real time, on the floor, within months. And that's exactly why it sits at number 1 over trades that are objectively more historically significant in terms of championships and legacy. Every other trade on this list took years to prove lopsided. This one proved it before the season even ended. That's the countdown. All 15. And if you're wondering whether this exact pattern is still playing out right now, in real time, this week, it absolutely is. And look, this isn't just a theory. This literally just happened. This past week alone, the ripple effects from 3 of these exact trades showed up on the floor, live, in real games that actually mattered in the standings.
Look at all of the
Pacers' current core, built entirely off the Halliburton trade, kept proving the value gap gets wider every single time they're competitive against a top-tier opponent on a national stage. The Lakers' current roster construction, built on the back of 2 separate, lopsided superstar trades a decade apart, Anthony Davis in 2019 and Luka Doncic in 2025, keeps generating national coverage every single time they close out a tight, meaningful game late in the fourth quarter. And the Timberwolves are still being asked in post-game interviews about the Gobert trade, 3 full years later. 3 years. That's not a story that ended when the ink dried on the paperwork back in 2022. That's a story that's still actively being written in real time, every single week, in every single post-game press conference this season. And it's not just the trades we already covered. Watch how quickly a disgruntled star storyline is already forming around at least 2 other franchises heading into this offseason. You've seen the reporting. You've seen the cryptic social media posts. If you paid attention to segment 15 and segment 14 on this list, you already know exactly how this plays out. A team gets tired, leverage disappears, and somebody across the league picks up the phone at exactly the right moment. It's happened 15 times on this list alone, and it's about to happen again before this season is even over. This isn't recycled content. This is a live, breathing pattern, and based on everything we just broke down across all 15 of these deals, it's not stopping anytime soon. You just watched 15 trades that all prove the exact same thing over and over again. The team that panics loses, and the team that waits wins. Every single even trade the mainstream media told you was fine, it wasn't fine. Somebody got robbed, and somebody's still cashing that check to this day, every single season, whether the losing side wants to admit it or not. Think about the common thread running through all 15 of these. It's never really about talent evaluation going wrong. Every single team on the losing side of these trades had access to the same film, the same numbers, the same information everyone else did. What actually separated the winners from the losers was patience, leverage, and the willingness to wait for the right deal instead of the first deal. That's the real lesson buried underneath 60 years of NBA trade history, and it's still playing out today. Write this down, screenshot this. The Luka trade is going to be studied in front offices for the next 20 years, the same way people still study the Kobe trade today, decade after decade. If I'm wrong, come back and tell me. If I'm right, you already know. Comment question, which trade on this list is going to look even more lopsided 5 years from now? Not who wins. Tell me specifically which gap gets wider. Drop your answer below. I'm reading every single one, and I'll pin the best takes. If you watch this whole thing and you're not subscribed yet, that's on you. We called these before the mainstream even wanted to admit it. Hit subscribe so the next one finds you before the next trade deadline blows up your entire timeline again. Next time, we're ranking the worst contract extensions in NBA history, and one active superstars deal is about to make this list look tame by comparison.